morning or good evening to everyone out here. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Talmud, for this one-on-one discussion hosted by Academy of Social Franchising. My name is Tanushri here, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. And I have my teammates Hannah, Priya, and Sagar who will be assisting us with the discussions. So without any further delay, we will go ahead and start out to hear more from you about your journey. So can you share a bit about your journey leading to the founding of TMGB Innovations and what motivated you to focus on EDI, inclusive leadership, and organizational culture?
Absolutely, and real pleasure to be here with you. Feel really privileged. So my journey began in a grassroots perspective, actually, and I would say around 2000. Well, I used to be an associate director for social education outreach organization, and it was a charity. And what we used to do, we used to create a program for marginalized communities. We would create education access, arts activism, and creativity to advocate and to support these groups. And it was whilst I was associate director for that organization, a lot of our participants were having problems with the local police because they were from ethnically diverse communities, and they were just coming to learn. And they said, look, this is a real problem for us. So we reached out to the local police service and said, look, build a relationship with you. We need to change the dynamic. And when that first began, I chose not to get involved simply because I didn't want it to be a tokenistic endeavor. So that, on the surface, it looked like the work was being done, but they were having the same problems. So I opted out of it the first time. The second time around, they asked me to run it again and said only on the condition that I can completely change it. And what I did, I stripped back the program and I said, okay, we're going to start from how can we communicate as human beings? What is our shared currency? We all grew up somewhere. We all had childhood friends. We all had childhood friends we all had different relationships with authority figures. Okay. Right. And in that journey, we had police officers who would come in plain clothes, and we had this narrative. And when we developed the relationships, we then looked at what are the human causes for confrontation. It could be concerns about money, relationships, bad sleep, social issues. And we said, okay, what happens when those issues arise and you have conflict? And then I shifted the conversation to say, how is that conversation different for a police officer? Well, this became very successful, and it attracted attention from the head office in policing in the UK. And it was so impacting that it attracted international attention. And I don't know if you've heard of an organization called Open Society Foundations or George Soros Foundations. So he's an organization that was based in the UK and in New York, which looked at social justice and community and youth engagement, heard about what's happening here, and also with the Runnymede Trust. And they said, look, this sounds amazing. Could we look at what you're doing? Because we're having issues in the Netherlands and in Northern Ireland and in the US. So I ran a weekend of training, and they brought delegates over from these regions, and they really liked it. So then I flew over to the Danish Institute of Human Rights, and I met the municipality and local government there, head of international kind of police services and also communities there. And where they wanted me to focus was in the Netherlands, specifically with the Dutch Moroccan community and the native Dutch community, which were having lots of issues. And again, I went out there and I brokered the relationship essentially because communications had broken down and they didn't trust each other. So I brokered the relationship, and then they agreed to have 3 days of intense training with me. So I spent a day with the police force and a day with the Moroccan community, and I brought them together on the third day, and it was again success. So what I did, I trained facilitators out there, and then I designed a program, a guideline for them to use. And that was really my journey, foundation of my journey into EDI. And within that same framework, I also began working for an organization called the International Debate Education Association, called IDEA, which looked at using debate as a tool for advocacy. And again, I became the principal consultant with them from 2013, even up until 2020. We did lots of work at the European Commission and the European Parliament, looking at advocacy, working with European MPs, that type of thing. I guess that's my foundation.
So you must have met wonderful people in this journey in these many places and with various kind of learnings too.
Absolutely.
So you have worked across various sectors, including healthcare, education, and finance. How have these diverse experiences shaped your approach to consulting in EDI and leadership?
Absolutely, good question. So I always say this: I'm not an expert in every industry that there is, but what I do have, I have a practice and an approach which is about how human beings process, develop ideas, cultivate learning, build relationships, enhance their practice. So that allows me to traverse different industries. So what that enabled me to do is just to say, well, actually, you need to tell me what the issue is. So I listen to you. You tell me what it is you're trying to solve. And based on what you give me, I then apply the skills. And that's how I can work with different sectors.
Thank you so much for sharing. Definitely, when we listen, half of it is already solved because we know like what is it they are looking out for. And that's when you can put in your skill set and other things in place in order to provide a solution to them. Thank you. So let's hear about TMGB Innovations emphasizes fostering inclusive thinking and emotional intelligence. Can you provide a specific example where your approach led to significant change in an organization?
I worked with an organization. So what they do, they handle government funding in the UK. And what they have to do, they have to source that funding to providers. And those providers then go out and deliver services within the country. So that organization is quite a big organization, but it's also got a parent company, which is a private equity organization. Okay, so there's lots of dynamics. So their issue was that they lacked a comprehensive equality or diversity inclusion approach to their work, to how they made decisions, how people were promoted within the company in itself, as well as potentially with partners too. So they approached me to help them to reevaluate their idea around EDI, but also to develop employee resource groups or working groups. What I did, I worked with their leadership and looked at, first of all, what informed their thinking, what was their collective understanding of inclusion, because it can be different to different people, and how did that vision align with the values of the organization. And what we actually discovered is that they were unclear about the values of the organization and had different interpretations of them. So that was the first key thing. You have to understand why you're in the room. What are you trying to do? Once you understand what you're trying to do, then you say, well, why are you invested? What does it mean to you? Okay, that's the kind of first step. Then I say, well, what is the current culture of well-being? How do you look after and value each other? And again, that was at a very low baseline. Once you ask and create an opportunity for them to answer those questions, then you can begin to have a conversation around how can you be more inclusive? Because any organization doesn't have capacity or even the desire kind of uproot the whole organization, and you don't need to. The fact that the organization is already set up means that you've got key factors in place. It's more about filling the gaps. So then once we open the questions, we then look at how you can be inclusive. All these things are fundamental to just who we are as human beings. So once you cultivate the emotional intelligence, you can then create a pathway. Often in an organization, when you have challenges, it's often an idea that you're challenging. So to shift change, you need to have an emotional awareness, but also go, okay, what is the current thinking around that? What is our policy on that? So you change the thinking, change the practice, then you change the policy so it reflects everything. They have a coherent plan for equality, diversity, inclusion. They have EDI champions, and they've actually pushed forward now, and it's embedded in their culture too. And I've got other examples where organizations have gone on to win awards for EDI as well.
Yes, as you rightly said, being human beings, the emotional intelligence also plays a very key important role. Thank you. So coming to the next question. So with your extensive experience in delivering programs internationally, how do you adapt your strategies to different culture contexts?
Absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to being flexible, responsive, and agile. For example, when working with a company, the way in which they may respond to things socially may be very different to different groups. And the key thing is being able to respond to and pick up on those social cues and dynamics. Because if you misinterpret those, you'll make assumptions and you'll miss everything. So the key thing I do is just to remain consistently open in a full 60 way. So listen to the client, listen to the customer. Once I've listened, make sure I have researched them enough. On the basis of that listening and that engagement, I then design the proposals. This was back in 2012, to the point where I went back 4 more times to Central Asia to continue to work with them. And I'm still in touch with some of those people now. So it's really about that openness, that authenticity, and really responding.
So you have consulted with high-profile organizations like the Greater London Authority and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. What are some common challenges senior leadership teams face with implementing EDI initiatives, and how do you help them overcome these obstacles?
So it's a very good question. So EDI in particular, it's because people bring themselves to their role. Okay, and often, let's say in the UK, predominantly the leadership models will be predominantly white males, and they will bring a lot of heritage and have a very specific perspective. Even if it isn't that, there will be an attitude which is quite dominant in one cultural perspective. Okay, so already from a subconscious level, there's a barrier. So what I always do is to lower defenses. And a lot of people, when they hear EDI, they think, oh, they don't know, how do we do EDI? How do we be inclusive? And they don't believe in it. Okay, and that's the big challenge. The way I do that is to be very human. So I ask very, very human questions. For example, why do you do what you do? What do you value about the business? Why is it important to you? How has it changed your life? What does inclusion mean to you? What does it look like? And when you ask these types of questions, you begin to see a pattern of thinking, and then you introduce what it actually is and also what it can be. I worked with them the first time, and we did a lot of tweaking to get the right program. I worked with them 3 more times afterwards. And so what they want to make sure is anyone who was new coming into a leadership position actually got the process. And then I did a trainer of trainers where I then trained some of their team as well to do that. And also the Philharmonic Orchestra, similar process. I worked with the governance, accountable for the directorship. I then worked with the CEO and directorship. I then worked with the HR team, and then actually worked with the individual members as well. So I did the whole company. And my approach to that is, for consistency and for unity of culture, you have one conversation pitched at different levels.
So, hi, Mr. Talmud. Thank you for your insights. So, coming to your given role as a Chief Wellbeing Officer at Heal Conscious, how do you integrate well-being into your leadership and EDI strategies? Hey,
it's me. So, it's a good question. So that's a new company, and it's a startup company, and it's founded in Pakistan and also in the US, but the leadership is in actually Pakistan. So I've had a number of different roles in coming into the company. One is to support the founder and the CEO. So part of my journey is also being to help leaders and new leaders and people who are starting up their businesses to have coherent vision and values, like your pillars, and to be clear about what they aspire to, because that is the foundation of a company, really. So key roles in there is to enable the founder to be clear about what the objective is, to make sure the decisions are congruent with that. Another key role is to embed well-being into every interaction. So my role is dual. One of my roles is to embed well-being into the business, but also the product itself I've been also reviewing and assessing. So it's essentially the product is a mental health care in a box, like a toolkit. And so I've been also reviewing that. So In terms of the company, I've been ensuring that well-being is embedded into our interactions. How do we communicate with each other? How do we speak to each other? But here's what's interesting. That being said, it's still a place where human beings exist like anywhere. And you still have personalities. So I found that although there are the cultural differences, it still comes down to personality, because how some leaders will do something is very much about them, because other people within the company operate differently. That makes sense. So part of my role has been to be cohesive, to ensure that, okay, why are we trying to do this and why? How is it well-being embedded in that? So I appreciate that we need to reach this objective, but if we miss the important things, the objective hasn't really been met. So it's very important to say, okay, how do we value the conversations we have and how do we communicate that? Because when you say to that person, wow, thank you so much for that work, I notice here you've identified this key point, that's actually quite important.
So, in your experience, how important is emotional intelligence in leadership, and what technique do you use to cultivate it in your leaders you coach?
I cultivate that with businesses by doing things like examining how people respond and react in a pressurized situation. And I have exercises where you kind of examine that, and then you engage in a process of unpacking where your emotional intelligence sits, and you can measure it. And part of that is also looking at your underlying biases, your preferences, because that also informs who you feel comfortable with and who you respond to, and who you don't feel comfortable with and who you don't respond to as well. So I take people on a journey of identifying where those biases and preferences sit, and identifying them, and then knowing how to act differently on a basis of them. And I have a mixed background, so I have background in different therapies and different elements of psychology, which I kind of bring into play.
Right, great insights. So coming to the impact and legacy, you founded Quality Interactions and Creativity, CIC, focusing on empowering young people from diverse backgrounds. What impact do you hope this initiative will have on the next generation?
Okay, great question. You've really done your research, really good questions. At one stage, I was doing a lot of, contract work with a lot of educational establishments, at every level. So I was working with universities, doing in a kind of consulting capacity. I was working with colleges in a similar way, right? So I was working everywhere. And I was working with a primary school, and I was working to support students who were on the verge of being excluded, to keep them on track and get them, back on side. And there was one particular student whose family had experienced domestic violence. Okay, and he had a lot of anxiety and a lot of vulnerability, and he would hide under tables and he wouldn't respond. So I managed to build a relationship with this particular student and get him to open up. And he was just arriving at a place where he felt safe. Now, the current principal head teacher changed and a new one came in. So they decided to get rid of this initiative. And this troubled me because that meant I couldn't work with it personally. I just got to that point. And it was, I even said, look, I'll just do it even. Don't worry about funding. So what I did, I reached out to the family and continued to support the young man and the family actually, who were kind of recovering from domestic violence. I'm also a fellow of something called the Royal Society for the Arts, and they were doing a crowdfunding campaign for fellows. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a model which I can basically train young people and go into spaces. So I did some crowdfunding for 4 weeks, and the target was 2,000, and I reached that target. And with that money, I trained a group of maybe 10 to 12 young adults who I'd also worked with in a different capacity. And then with those groups, we went into different schools and delivered program. I then, on the back of that, instituted the company, and we then got different various elements of funding, and we went into programs. So in terms of impact, I know that in the life of the company to date, we reached at least over 3,000 children. So for example, in terms of the work that I do with TNGB Innovations, it depends on the company I'm working with. Yeah. So sometimes they say to me, you know, I'll go in as a single consultant, that's fine. But sometimes I'll go through the company, and actually QIC is the parent company.
Great work. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. So coming to the collaboration opportunities, what inspired you to collaborate with the Academy of Social Franchising, and what specific roles such as mentoring or coaching are you most interested in taking on?
Absolutely. So I'm open and intrigued to see what you want to do and what you'd like to achieve. Because as you know, what I do, I can do many things. It's all about people currency.
Thank you very much, Talmud, for sharing all your insights and your experiences that you have acquired in so many years with us. And your expertise in this segment is truly inspiring, and how you are inspiring people through work and also the other activities what you're doing. So we appreciate your time and your contribution to our discussion.